This is the terrifying origin story of Vlad the Impaler, aka Dracula. He was born beneath the shadow of dragons. In the winter of 1431, in the fortified town of Siasawara, deep within the heart of Transylvania, a child opened his eyes to a world already drenched in betrayal and blood. That child would become Vlad III, later known as Vlad Țepeș, Vlad the Impaler. But in the beginning, he was simply the son of a prince and the pawn of a brutal world. His father, Vlad II Dracula, bore the name of the Dragon Dracula title bestowed upon him by the Order of the Dragon, a secretive chivalric society founded by the King of Hungary. Their purpose was singular: to protect Christian Europe from the advancing tide of the Ottoman Empire. But titles meant nothing in a land carved between empires. Wallachia, Vlad's homeland, was not a kingdom. It was a battleground, a buffer state caught between the Catholic kings of Hungary and the Muslim sultans of the East. From the moment of his birth, Vlad's destiny was entangled in this endless war of gods, crowns, and blades. Vlad II was a man of ambition, cunning, and pragmatism. He ruled not through faith or loyalty, but through manipulation. One day he bent the knee to Hungary. The next he pledged fealty to the Ottomans. To survive in Wallachia meant to master the art of betrayal. And Vlad, the child, watched it all. He saw how a prince smiled with poison behind his teeth, how men kissed crosses by day and sharpened knives by night. And in the cold corridors of his father's court, Vlad learned that trust was a weakness and pain, a lesson. Mother, whose name is lost to time, offered little warmth. She was likely a noblewoman of Moldavian or Transylvanian blood, given in marriage to secure alliances, not love. She died while Vlad was still young, leaving him alone with the intrigues of court and a father whose gaze was always fixed on the throne. But it wasn't just politics that shaped Vlad's world. It was fear. Outside the stone walls of the castles, villages were burned by raiding bands of Turks or pillaged by Hungarian mercenaries. Wolves roamed the forests, and darker thingsmen with no allegiance, no soul waited in the shadows. The peasants whispered of Strigotha undead, of devils who walked as men, of the boy prince who never cried, even when beaten. Even then, Vlad was becoming a legend. At the age of 5, he witnessed his first impalement. A local thief had stolen from the royal kitchens. His father, Dracula, ordered the man skewered on a sharpened stake, raised high for all to see. The boy did not flinch. He did not cry. He simply watched. And something inside him, something dark, stirred. Years later, Vlad would replicate the scene 1,000 times over. But on that day, he was still only a boy learning the language of power. In 1436, Vlad II seized the throne of Wallachia with Hungarian support. The family moved to Targovict, the capital, and Vlad, now a young prince, was introduced to a court where treachery was as common as prayer. But not all lessons came from within the palace. Beyond the city walls, nobles known as Bojars held immense power. They were landowners, warriors, and kingmakers. They had no loyalty to any prince. And when they did bow, it was only to strike from below. The Bojars had murdered rulers before, and they would again. Vlad watched his father try to appease them, watched him promise wealth, marriages, land, and he saw how little it bought. By the time Vlad was 10, he knew the truth. To rule Wallachia, you had to hold fear tighter than faith. You had to be the nightmare that others whispered about. But just as he began to grasp the Game of Thrones, fate tore it from his hands. In 1442, his father was summoned to meet with Ottoman envoys. As part of the agreement, Vlad II offered 2 of his sons, Vlad and his younger brother, Rodua, as hostages to guarantee loyalty to the Sultan. It was a common practice. A political promise sealed with blood. Vlad was only 11. He was taken from his homeland, from the cold forests and burning fields of Wallachia, and delivered into the hands of the very empire he was taught to hate. There, in the heart of Ottoman territory, in the glittering yet foreign courts of Sultan Murad II, Vlad would learn new languages, new punishments, new hatreds. This was no princely education. It was the making of a monster. He left Wallachia as a child of dragons. He would return as the son of death. Thanks for watching. They didn't break his body. They broke his soul. And somehow that was worse. When Vlad the Impaler was handed over to the Ottoman Empire in 1442, he was just 11 years old. A boy torn from the cold forests of Wallachia and thrown into the golden prison of his enemies. He and his younger brother Radu were sent to the court of Sultan Murad II, a place where power and pleasure flowed like wine, but so did blood. To the Ottomans, these boys were not guests. They were living pledges, pawns, in a game of empire. One false move by their father, and their heads would roll without ceremony. At first, the brothers were confined to the fortress of Akrigs in Anatolia. The cold stone walls were unforgiving. The guards spoke a language Vlad barely understood. The food was unfamiliar. Punishment was swift and brutal, and always for the smallest infraction. They were cut off from everything they had known. No one cared if they cried, but Vlad didn't cry. While Radu wept, Vlad clenched his fists. While Radu adapted, Vlad observed. He watched how power moved, quiet, sharp, merciless. His brother Radu, with his soft features and quiet voice, eventually won favor with the Ottomans. He learned their language, their customs, their religion. He became a favorite of Prince Mehmed, the Sultan's son, the very boy who would one day become Mehmed the Conqueror. But Vlad resisted. He refused to bend. He refused to convert. And for that they punished him. It began subtly. Colder cells, poorer food, longer hours in isolation. But resistance only fueled his captor's cruelty. Soon the beatings began. Vlad was whipped until his back was a raw tapestry of scars. He was suspended by ropes, left hanging in the dark, bleeding. At times he was starved until he hallucinated, saw his father's ghost in the corners of his cell. There were whispers, quiet ones, of more intimate abuses, though history dares not record them in detail. What's certain is that the boy they imprisoned did not remain a boy for long. He mutated into something cold, calculating, dangerous. In the Sultan's court, the young princes were often forced to witness executions. To be taught the nature of authority and its cost, Vlad watched men beheaded, burned, flayed, but one method struck him deeper than the rest: impalement. He watched as sharpened stakes, sometimes thick, sometimes thin, were driven through living men and women. Slowly. Vlad the Impaler, son of the dragon. Captivity is a teacher unlike any other. It strips away the illusions. It silences comfort. And in the silence, only one voice remains your own. For Vlad, captivity had begun as a punishment, a humiliation. But over time, it became something else. School, a forge, a crucible where fear melted into calculation and pain was refined into purpose. While his brother Radu basked in the luxury of Ottoman favor, Vlad wandered deeper into the shadowed corners of the palace. There, among eunuchs and forgotten prisoners, he listened. He heard stories from Turkish generals of Mongol sieges, betrayal among brothers, of how empires were not built on honor but on obedience. He observed the sultans and their viziers, who ruled with elegance by day and cruelty by night. He saw how a well-timed execution could halt a rebellion, how a display of terror could pacify thousands, how spectacle was power. And Vlad remembered it all. The throne of Wallachia was not given to Vlad. He took it one corpse at a time. When Vlad returned to his homeland in late 1456, the air smelled of betrayal. The streets were quiet. The nobles watched from their stone towers with cautious eyes. And the people barely dared to hope. Wallachia had become a graveyard of rulers. In the last decade, 3 princes had taken the throne. All had died, murdered, overthrown, or disappeared into the cold fog of history. The land was split between the influence of Hungary in the west and the Ottoman Empire in the east. And in the middle stood the Bojar's vultures draped in silk, who whispered to whichever side paid more. When Vlad crossed into the capital city of Targovekt, he didn't announce himself as a king. He arrived in silence. No trumpets, no parades. It's only soldiers and vengeance. The current ruler, Vladislav II, a puppet installed by Hungary, had grown complacent. He had not expected the scrawny boy they once exiled to return with Ottoman support and a heart full of bloodlust. The confrontation was swift. A duel cold steel in the night. Vlad killed Vladislav himself, slicing through the man's defenses like parchment. Some say he didn't stop at death, that he defiled the body. Others say he stood over the corpse and whispered, Now they will learn. The throne was his. So was the retribution. He summoned the boyars, those same nobles who had betrayed his father, those who had watched his brother die screaming, those who had lived fat and unpunished, while Vlad rotted in foreign chains, invited them to a lavish Easter feast in the royal court. Silken banners fluttered in the wind, tables overflowed with roasted meats and honeyed wine. The nobles came dressed in finery, oblivious, laughing, and Vlad greeted them with warmth. He smiled, he toasted. He listened to their lies with patient eyes. Then, when the wine had dulled their suspicions, he stood and raised a single hand. Guards flooded the room, doors slammed shut, the laughter died. Vlad did not shout, he simply listed names. One by one, he recited their crimes, real or imagined. Collaborations with foreign powers, conspiracies, betrayals, acts of cowardice. Some nobles denied it, others wept. But Vlad had no interest in pleas. He ordered them all arrested. The elderly were impaled on stakes outside the city, their gray heads tilted to the sky as if still in disbelief. The younger ones, men and women alike, were marched on foot to the mountains of Ponari. No food, no water, no horses. Those who collapsed were whipped. Those who cried were dragged. And those who tried to flee were skewered through the stomach and left twitching in the dust. When they reached the mountain, Vlad gave a single command: "Build me a fortress from your bones." And they did. Stone by stone, under the whip and lash, they built Ponari Castle, the future stronghold of the Impaler himself. Those who survived became walking ghosts, forever broken. Those who didn't became foundations. In a matter of weeks, Vlad had done what no Wallachian ruler had accomplished in generations. He had cleansed the land of its corrupt nobility. The message was brutal, but clear. Wallachia would no longer be ruled by cowardice, not by foreign kings, not by backroom whispers, only by terror. And the people noticed. The merchants, the peasants, the farmers, those who had long lived under the thumb of the boyars, began to speak of Vlad with awe. Not love, never love, but something close to respect. He imposed strict laws, punishing theft, dishonesty, and laziness with vicious efficiency. A man who stole a single coin might find his hand nailed to the city gate. A woman who lied could have her tongue cut out and displayed in the village square. But in this reign of terror, something strange happened. Order, crime plummeted, roads were safe, trade flourished. The forests echoed less with screams of the oppressed and more with the silence of obedience. Vlad's court became a machine of punishment, but it worked. He surrounded himself not with nobles, but with loyal soldiers and foreign mercenaries. Men who feared him more than death itself. He made alliances when necessary. He paid tribute to the Ottomans, but always with veiled contempt. He dined with emissaries, but made them tremble. One famous tale survives. An Ottoman delegation arrived in his court, refusing to remove their turbans as a sign of respect for their customs. Vlad, ever gracious, responded, "Then let them never be removed." He ordered their turbans nailed to their skulls. No one ever tested his hospitality again. By 1459, Wallachia was no longer a torn borderland. It was a kingdom of fear, and Vlad was its undisputed master. But this was only the beginning. Because impalement, his signature punishment, was still in its infancy. The world had seen his wrath, not yet his art. And soon his enemies, Turks, Hungarians, Saxons, even his own subjects, would come to learn. Vlad did not simply kill. He transformed death into architecture, into language, into a monument of warning so horrific it could silence an entire army, and the stakes were just being sharpened. Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia, knew how to change a man. One life altered by choice, by action, by consequence. That was Vlad's specialty. But Vlad also knew that one life wasn't enough. He needed to build something larger, something to outlast him, something to become a second nature to his people. So he crafted his reputation like a sculptor, painstakingly chiseling away at it until it was sharp, imposing, unforgettable. He chose to be known not by his deeds alone, but by the whispers that followed him. And those whispers carried on the wind, growing louder, colder, more insistent. By the time Vlad's armies approached a town, the residents already knew who he was. They didn't need to see his banner or read his demands. The silence between the trees told them all they needed to know. He rarely drew his sword, but when he did, it was said to be as precise and cold as the winter frost. Each decision, each decree, each punishment was designed to send a message that resonated long after it was delivered. His messengers weren't diplomats, but his presence alone commanded respect. Even his letters to powerful kings like Matthias Corvinus of Hungary carried an eerie formality. No boasts, no braggadocio, just cold, hard facts. When enemies came to his borders, they often found silent fields and empty villages. Not by coincidence, but by design. In one infamous episode, an invading force found not a battle, not resistance, just emptiness and the echoes of Vlad's message. And that message was simple: do not disturb the order. That moment became the symbol of his reign. A land where consequences were visual, unforgettable, and delivered without hesitation. The invading army, one of the most powerful of its time, chose to turn back, not because of battle fatigue, not because of defeat, but because of what they saw, what they felt, what they feared. For travelers and townsfolk alike, the landscape itself became a lesson. In Wallachia, there was one law: order. To keep it, Vlad expected discipline. Foreign visitors quickly learned to respect his customs or face the consequences. Those who didn't often found themselves at the center of memorable stories, tales repeated from city to city, kingdom to kingdom, stories spread across Europe. Woodcut prints showed a severe, unflinching ruler seated in a grim throne. Pamphlets described a man of unbreakable resolve. And in hushed voices, parents invoked his name when children misbehaved. Be careful, Vlad watches. To those who lived under his rule, though to those who obeyed, he wasn't a monster. He was their protector. Under his rule, merchants traveled safely, crimes dropped, and roads were secure. Yes, it was a reign of fear, but also a reign of results. While critics abroad condemned him, many locals slept better at night, knowing that justice in Wallachia was swift, equal, and clear. To Vlad, this wasn't cruelty. It was clarity. He had seen chaos. He had been shaped by betrayal. And now he ruled with the precision of someone who had learned the cost of weakness. Vlad the Impaler didn't need to yell or threaten or plead. He simply governed, and the world listened. Not to declarations, not to laws, but to something far more powerful: silence. It wasn't just a battlefield. It was a monument, a cathedral built from fear itself. In the spring of 1462, the Ottoman Sultan Mehmed the Conqueror decided that Vlad Țepeș had become more than a regional nuisance. He was a threat, a ruler who resisted tribute, defied emissaries, and challenged the empire's will. So Mehmed gathered a massive force, an army of over 100,000 men supported by siege engines, cavalry, and war galleys on the Danube. They would march into Wallachia, crush Vlad, and end his reign once and for all. But Vlad had no intention of meeting them in open battle. He knew their numbers were too great, their weapons too many, their resolve too strong. So instead, he turned to the only weapon that had never failed him: fear. He retreated from the advancing army, scorching the earth behind him. Wells were poisoned, crops destroyed, villages emptied. All along the roads leading to the capital of Targvist, his men worked tirelessly. Stakes were raised, silent warnings were left behind. When Mehmed's army finally approached the outskirts of Targvist, they expected a siege. What they found instead broke their spirit. The valley before the city had been transformed into a vast spectacle, an open-air warning where every figure told a story. Some bore signs of treason. Others carried messages carved into wood. This is what happens to invaders. The Ottomans, hardened by war, no strangers to violence, stopped in their tracks. Even Mehmed himself, the conqueror of Constantinople, was visibly shaken. Chroniclers say he remained silent for nearly an hour, staring at what Vlad had created. He had never seen war used this way, not as combat, not even as conquest, but as pure psychological devastation. The soldiers refused to advance. Some deserted in the night. Others begged for permission to withdraw. And Mehmed, faced with the prospect of fighting a ruler who turned terror into strategy, gave the order, retreat. The most powerful empire in the world turned back. Vlad had defeated them without raising a sword. But the Forest of the Impaled was not just a tactical victory. It was a manifesto, a declaration of how Vlad saw the world. To him, fear was not simply a tool. It was a message board, a theater, a form of communication louder than diplomacy, clearer than treaties. And once he realized the power of this spectacle, he used it again and again. In later years, merchants who defied his tariffs, village leaders who betrayed him, even emissaries who arrived unprepared for his court, all were confronted with similar displays. No place was safe. No one was immune. And the forest was never truly gone. Because even after the bodies decayed, the stakes remained, weathered, splintered. But still standing, reminders to anyone who dared enter that this was Vlad's kingdom. The legends began to spread. In Germany, pamphlets depicted him as a monstrous tyrant. In Russia, he was praised as a holy avenger. In Hungary, stories painted him as a cruel oppressor. In the Ottoman Empire, his name was spoken in whispers. And in Wallachia, the people caught between reverence and horror called him what he had always been, Țepeș, the Impaler, the ruler who turned fear into a weapon sharper than any blade. This is a tale of terror and treason, betrayal and vengeance, of one of history's most infamous rulers and his fall from power. The Forest of the Impaled had scared off an empire. But Vlad knew something far more dangerous was coming. Not foreign armies, not swords, but whispers. Whispers from within his own court. He had ruled with terror. Yes, the terror is a double-edged blade. It keeps enemies at bay, but it also breeds paranoia. And in Wallachia, betrayal was not a matter of if, it was a matter of when. The boyars he had spared were not grateful. They were waiting. For a stumble, a sign of weakness, a crack in the armor of the dragon. And abroad, Matthias Corvinus, the king of Hungary, Vlad's supposed Christian ally, began to reconsider his loyalty. Vlad's methods were becoming difficult to justify in the eyes of Europe. Ambassadors from the Holy Roman Empire brought with them horrifying stories. Forests of corpses, rivers red with blood, and peasants impaled for crimes as small as stealing bread. The church looked to Hungary for action, and Corvinus, ever the politician, began to see Vlad as a liability. Meanwhile, back in Wallachia, Vlad's reign was growing increasingly paranoid. He trusted no one, not his advisors, not his servants, not even his own guards. He began rotating soldiers constantly. Anyone who served him too long was either disappeared or replaced. He changed the locations of his sleeping quarters each night. He banned closed doors in his court. Even laughter was viewed with suspicion. What were they laughing at? Who had told the joke? Was the joke about him? Vlad had become a specter in his own castle, drifting from room to room with daggers hidden beneath his robes, eyes that never blinked and ears tuned to silence more than words. Then came the letters. They were discovered by one of Vlad's spies, secret correspondences between the Bojars and the Hungarians. The nobles had grown weary of Vlad's rule. The fear that once kept them silent had now turned to desperation. They wanted him gone, and they had a plan. In the dead of night, they would open the gates of Targovist to Hungarian troops, who would seize Vlad and install a more reasonable ruler. The moment Vlad learned of the plot, something snapped. He summoned every boyar still alive and held a special council. The nobles arrived, nervous but masked in smiles. They bowed, they praised his victories. They lied, and Vlad listened. He nodded. He smiled. He poured them wine. And then, without changing his tone, without raising his voice, he spoke. "I know your letters. I know your plans. I know your treachery." They froze. Some tried to speak. Others collapsed to their knees. One tried to flee, but the guards were already behind him, swords drawn. That night, over 200 nobles were impaled just outside the city walls. Vlad personally oversaw the placement of each stake. He ordered the taller ones for the richer boyars, shorter ones for their sons. A special crooked stake was made for one noble who had mocked Vlad's mother. It spiraled through the gut before exiting the mouth. The executions lasted 3 days, and during it all, Vlad did not eat, did not sleep. He simply watched, stone-faced, unblinking. When it was done, he restructured his entire government. The noble class was replaced with commoners, soldiers, and foreigners, men loyal not to bloodlines, but to fear, loyal to him. But the internal threats didn't stop. Not long after, he discovered a plot among his own guards. A handful of soldiers had been bribed to poison his food. They were tortured, interrogated, then impaled inside the castle walls, so he could look upon them daily as he dined. Even his mistresses were not exempt. One woman, suspected of passing information to Hungarian spies, was summoned to Vlad's chambers. He embraced her, kissed her, then stabbed her through the heart with a golden dagger, whispering, "Even love can rot." The castle grew quieter. Visitors became rarer. Vlad's own family stopped writing. He was no longer just feared, he was isolated. And that perhaps was his greatest weakness, because outside his walls the world was shifting. Matthias Corvinus, pressured by the Pope and eager to maintain alliances, began to act. He denounced Vlad's behavior publicly and in secret. He supported Vlad's brother Radu, once the soft child of Ottoman captivity. Now, a polished diplomat and military commander, the Ottomans, too, saw an opportunity. They offered Radu their full support, promising him the Wallachian throne in exchange for loyalty. In 1462, while Vlad prepared for another campaign against Turkish incursions, Radu crossed the border with an Ottoman-backed force. And for the first time, Vlad found himself abandoned. The people, broken and afraid, did not rise to defend him. The nobles who remained remembered the stakes. The soldiers hesitated, and Vlad, he fled, not in disgrace, but in silence. He escaped north into Hungarian territory, seeking protection from Matthias Corvinus. But Corvinus had already made his choice. Vlad was arrested, his titles revoked, his freedom stolen. Just like that, the Impaler became a prisoner once more. Not in a Turkish dungeon this time, but in a European cell, walls that echoed with Latin prayers instead of Arabic chants. And the stakes, they remained in the ground, swaying gently in the wind, waiting for their master to return. They had chained his body, but they could never chain his will. Vlad the Impaler, Prince of Wallachia, a name that carried fear across continents, had fallen, not to swords or rebellion, but to politics. He was no longer on the battlefield, but within the cold stone walls of a European fortress. His captor, Matthias Corvinus, King of Hungary, once an ally, now a cautious observer, wary of the growing controversy surrounding Vlad's reign. To the outside world, Corvinus claimed his hands were tied. Vlad's rule had become too controversial. Whispers of excessive cruelty had spread across borders. It was easier to silence him quietly than confront him directly. And so, Vlad became a prisoner. It's not broken, just waiting. 12 years passed. While most would have faded into obscurity or despair, Vlad remained vigilant. He read, he observed, listened. Even locked away, his presence unsettled those around him. Guards spoke in hushed tones. Visitors avoided eye contact. Some claimed he had grown even more calculating. Strange rumors emerged. He spoke to no one but himself. That he spent hours gazing out his window, unmoving. That he was simply waiting for the world to change, and it did. By the early 1470s, the Ottoman Empire, long a dominant force, began pushing deeper into the Balkans once again. Wallachia, under Vlad's brother Radu, grew unstable. Radu passed in 1475 under mysterious circumstances. And suddenly Wallachia had no ruler. The nobles who once feared Vlad began to reconsider. Say what you will about his methods, he had kept the borders safe. He had ruled with strength. Strength now more than ever was needed. A request was made to King Corvinus, release Vlad. Let him return under guidance, of course. Corvinus, reluctant but practical, agreed. In 1476, Vlad was freed. He did not return as the same man who had ruled before. He was older, colder, sharper. He returned to Wallachia, not with a vast army, but with a purpose, to reclaim control. His return was swift and precise. Those who had worked against him were quietly removed from power. Some were exiled. Others disappeared from public view. His presence alone was enough to restore a sense of discipline. But this new reign was different. The political situation was more fragile. The Ottoman Empire was watching closely. Tensions rose. Small attacks began along the borders. Vlad responded decisively, but now with international eyes watching his every move, his support among the nobles wavered. Alliances shifted like sand and enemies gathered in the shadows. By December of 1476, the final blow arrived. The details of his death are debated to this day. Some say he fell in battle. Others claim it was an ambush, orchestrated from within. There are even accounts suggesting mistaken identity, a tragic confusion on the battlefield. What is certain is this: Vlad the Impaler died, and his death marked the end of an era. His body was lost to time. But his head, according to many chroniclers, was sent to the Ottoman court as proof of his demise. It was the final act in a lifetime of symbolism. The end of a man who had once ruled through fear, precision, and strategy. Wallachia, now silent, felt the absence. Though he had ruled with an iron grip, many quietly admitted that life had been more secure under his reign. The roads were safer, the borders held strong. Order, harsh as it was, had existed. In the wake of his death, stories spread like wildfire. Some called him a monster, others a savior. Some whispered that he had become something more, a myth, a symbol, a legend. He was called many names: a tyrant, a protector, relic of a darker time. But perhaps the truth is simpler. Vlad the Impaler was a ruler forged by betrayal, tested by conflict, and remembered not for kindness, but for clarity. His justice was absolute, his methods unforgettable. To him, order was not passive, it was something built, enforced, and guarded. And though his time had ended, his story had just begun, retold for centuries, reimagined by poets, feared by generations. Not because he lived forever, but because the idea of him never died. Vlad's head had rotted. But his legend was just beginning to breathe. The year was 1476. The Impaler's corpse lay somewhere in the dirt of Wallachia, mutilated or secretly buried by those still loyal to him. His severed head, on the other hand, hung on a Turkish pike just outside the gates of Istanbul. Flies buzzed around it like carrion priests. The Sultan himself walked past it every day, not to mock it, but to remember, because no matter what anyone said, Vlad Țepeș had stopped him once, not with an army, but with terror so refined it became almost divine. That was the real power of Vlad. Death didn't silence him, it amplified him. In the years after his execution, stories about the Impaler began to spread across Europe faster than horses, deeper than swords. They passed from merchant to merchant, from monk to noble, and as they passed, they twisted. One tale became 10, 10 became 100. The truth dissolved, and all that remained was myth. The Germans, ever fond of printed pamphlets and grim morality tales, began publishing lurid woodcuts of Vlad. They showed him dining among forests of corpses, sipping blood from golden goblets, laughing as infants were boiled alive. In one account, he was described as a demon clad in flesh, whose soul was sown with needles, whose heart beat only when blood flowed. Other stories claimed he kept a library of deathware. Every corpse told a tale, and every stake bore a name. And through it all, one word began to emerge: a name, a title, curse. Dracula, to the Romanians. Dracula simply meant son of the dragon. A reference to Vlad's father, Vlad to Dracula, named for his membership in the chivalric Order of the Dragon. But to the rest of Europe, especially the terrified West, the name took on a darker hue. It wasn't just about dragons anymore. It was about the devil. Dracula in Romanian also meant demon. And so Dracula became not a lineage, but a sentence. Vlad the Impaler became Vlad the undead, a creature who did not die but waited, who drank not just blood but souls. This wasn't accidental. Centuries later, in the 19th century, an Irish writer named Bram Stoker would dig through archives and find references to this medieval tyrant, the man who impaled armies, who burned the poor, who used fear as architecture. Stoker was already crafting a story of Gothic horror centered around an immortal predator from the East. When he found the name Dracula, the pages stopped turning. The decision was made. And so the historical Vlad, flawed, brutal, political, was reborn in fiction as Count Dracula. The aristocrat vampire who drinks the blood of innocents and sleeps in a coffin lined with native soil. It was poetic, because Vlad never actually needed fangs, only a message. And in the end, that message outlived him. Even today, tourists flock to the Carpathian Mountains in search of Dracula's castle. Though Vlad never actually lived there. They visit the ruins of Ponari, where Vlad did rule perched high on a mountain. Its path lined with over 1,400 steps. They buy merchandise. They take photographs. They smile. But if they stand still long enough, if they let the wind rise and the sun fall, they might feel something else. The silence of judgment. It's a shadow of stakes. The echo of a man who made death a language. Historians debate him to this day. Some call him a genius strategist, a nationalist hero who stood against the might of the Ottomans with nothing but iron will. Others name him a psychopath, a sadist, whose mind was so broken by childhood trauma that it could only see peace through pain. But maybe both are true. Maybe Vlad was what the world deserved in that moment. Not a saint, not a savior, but a reminder that evil doesn't always wear horns. Sometimes it wears a crown. And sometimes that evil doesn't vanish. It waits. It transforms. It bleeds into the soil and grows fangs. Because history doesn't die. It only sharpens. And Vlad the Impaler, still watching.